I heard the word sold right on my own dirt, caught between the smell of dry hay, clanking metal, and an under contract sign flapping in the wind. My parents delivered the news like a weather report. It is done, they said. Sign it. But they forgot one thing. Land is sold with ink, not words. And deep inside a county clerk computer, something had been waiting years for the exact moment my family betrayed me. My name is Aurora Evans. I came back to the Evans family farm after a grinding 14-hour shift, my hands smelling of industrial grease and cheap diner coffee. My muscles ached with a deep, familiar exhaustion. The tires of my truck crunched over the long gravel driveway, the sound usually a comfort, a signal that I was home. But today, the landscape felt tainted. Neon pink ribbons fluttered violently against the dying afternoon wind. Survey stakes. They were driven deep into the hard-packed soil along the eastern fence line, spaced out exactly every 50 feet. They looked like jagged stitches ripping across an open wound, and right at the main iron gate, a brand-new metal sign swung from a heavy wooden post. The wind pushed it, making it clang against the wood in a hollow, rhythmic beat. Under contract, the letters were massive, bold, and aggressive. Red ink on a stark white background. Seeing it felt exactly like a branding iron being pressed directly into my flesh. I killed the engine. The dust settled around my heavy work boots as I stepped out of the cab. The wind kicked up immediately, biting at my face, carrying the smell of dry earth, rusted wire, and an impending, massive betrayal. My father, Russell, stood waiting by the porch steps. He wore his heavy leather work boots, but they looked entirely too clean today. He did not look like a farmer. He looked like a man playing a part. "It is sold," he said. He did not say hello. He did not ask about my day. He dropped those 3 words onto the dirt like heavy lead weights. My mother, Darlene, stood half a step behind him. Her posture was rigidly perfect. Her face held that practiced, patient, and utterly cold expression she always used when she was preparing to correct a disobedient child in front of polite company. She reached down and slowly smoothed the front of her expensive wool cardigan. Completely out of place against the backdrop of our weathered farmhouse, that was when I truly noticed the third person, the stranger. He absolutely did not belong here. He wore a crisp, bright white dress shirt, tucked perfectly neat into dark slacks that had never seen a single day of hard, honest labor. His shoes were black, polished to a high shine that caught the harsh sun. He held a thick, tightly packed manila folder clamped securely under his left arm. He took a confident step forward, extending a manicured hand that I simply stared at until he pulled it back. "Good afternoon," he said. His voice was incredibly smooth, carefully calibrated for air-conditioned boardrooms and high-stakes closing tables. It was the epitome of corporate politeness. "I am the broker representing the primary development group. We are all very excited about the upcoming transition." Transition. That was their clean, sterile word for wiping out 4 generations of Evans family history, for burying our legacy under asphalt and concrete. Darlene reached out, her fingers pale and steady, and plucked a single sheet of paper from the broker's folder. She stepped toward me, shoving it into my personal space. "Sign this right now. Aurora," she said. Her voice was entirely flat, stripped of any maternal warmth or hesitation. "It is just a standard acknowledgement form. Basic consent to vacate the secondary residential structures. Just sign it, and everything will go smoothly for all of us." I took the paper. The harsh wind immediately tugged at the thin edges, trying to rip it from my grip. I read the block of text. It was a completely generic form, stuffed full of vague legal jargon about cooperating with the new ownership and waiving rights to contest the development. But I was not reading the paragraphs. I was actively looking for the things that actually mattered in the real world. I scanned the top left corner. I checked the bottom right margins. Nothing. There was no official court file number. There was no county recording barcode. There was absolutely no notary stamp. It was just a worthless piece of printer paper specifically designed to bully me into terrified submission. I didn't scream or throw it back, because that's the performance they wanted. I just looked at them and asked for the only thing that mattered: the case number. "Where is the probate case number?" I asked. My voice was lower and quieter than the surrounding wind, but it cut right through the heavy tension of the yard. "Where is the official estate file for Grandpa Harold?" The silence that crashed down on us was suffocating. The heavy metal sign clanged violently against the wooden post again. Russell's face darkened instantly, turning a deep, angry crimson. The thick veins in his neck pushed hard against his collar. He took an aggressive step off the wooden porch, his large fists clenching tight at his sides. "He is Zed. Aurora. He has been completely gone for 2 years now. This farm is ours to do with as we please. You have absolutely no rights here anymore." Darlene did not blink. She merely offered a thin, incredibly bloodless smile. "Your grandfather left us the property. Dear, you are just a month-to-month tenant now. Stop acting like a child and stop making this difficult." I stared down at the dry dirt beneath my steel-toed boots. The soil was parched, cracking deeply in the unrelenting heat. A vivid memory flashed through my mind. I remembered standing in this exact spot with Grandpa Harold when I was just 10 years old. He had knelt down slowly, his joints popping, and scooped up a large handful of the dark earth. He let it sift slowly through his heavily calloused fingers, watching the dust blow away. People change the second dirt turns into money. "Aurora," he had told me, his voice gravelly and serious. "Never, ever trust a promise that is not in writing." He knew, even decades back then. He knew exactly who and what his son and daughter-in-law truly were. I did not argue with them. Arguing with brazen thieves only gives their lies a false sense of validity. I reached into my heavy jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. I raised it up and snapped a high-resolution picture of the generic paper still in my hand, making absolutely sure the complete lack of official stamps and the vague text were perfectly clear in the image. "What the hell are you doing?" Russell barked, stepping dangerously close to me. I completely ignored his existence. I turned my back on all 3 of them and walked steadily toward the main gate. I raised the camera and took a clear, centered picture of the under contract sign. Then I walked a few yards down the long fence line and photographed the neon pink survey stakes. Capturing the exact, undeniable way they violated the property line, I ruthlessly documented the entire scene. Every single photo I took was a silent, unbreakable promise of war. "Aurora, you turn around and come back here to sign that paper this instant." Darlene's carefully maintained calm facade finally cracked completely, her voice rising to a shrill, desperate pitch that echoed across the empty fields. I did not turn around. I walked straight back to my worn-out truck. The heavy metal door slammed shut with a satisfying, final thud, instantly sealing off their demanding voices. I jammed the key in the ignition and put the heavy engine in gear. As I violently turned the steering wheel, I looked at them one last time through the dirty rear-view mirror. 3 small, insignificant figures standing in the blowing dust of a legacy farm they stupidly thought they had already successfully sold. I hit the gas pedal hard. The rear tires spun aggressively, kicking a massive cloud of sharp gravel back toward the porch where they stood. I drove straight toward the main highway heading into town. The massive engine roared beneath me, a steady, powerful, mechanical heartbeat driving me forward with absolute purpose. I did not look back again. My parents honestly thought they had won simply because they brought a slick broker and a shiny new sign. They genuinely thought cheap intimidation was enough to erase my existence, but they were arrogant, and they were fools. They did not understand how the brutal machinery of the real world actually operated. The true battlefield was not the dusty front gate of an old farm. Blowing dirt, howling wind, and angry spoken words meant absolutely nothing in the eyes of the law. The only place that truly mattered was a cold, quiet, overly air-conditioned room exactly 22 miles away from here. The only place that mattered was the exact place where paper forcefully turned into undeniable power, the place with the humming laser printers, the heavy, ancient ledger books, and the cold, terrifying permanence of official red ink. The Bracken County Recorder and Clerk's office smelled exactly like stale coffee, degrading parchment, and quiet desperation. It was a sterile, heavily air-conditioned room where families came to bleed each other dry without ever throwing a single physical punch. Wars were fought here every single day, waged with heavy-duty staplers, notarized signatures, and the undeniable permanence of public county records. The silence in the main waiting area was thick and oppressive, broken only by the sharp, metallic snap of document binders and the dull hum of ancient fluorescent lights buzzing steadily overhead. I walked right past a row of empty, scratched wooden benches and stepped straight up to the thick, bulletproof glass divider of counter number 4. The woman sitting on the other side wore a faded blue cardigan over a floral blouse. Her black plastic name tag read, June Ralston. She had the deep, permanent wrinkles of someone who had spent the last 30 years watching siblings lie, children steal, and spouses cheat. June possessed the kind of tired, uncompromising eyes that could spot a forged signature from 10 feet away in a dimly lit room. "I need a complete chain of title search for parcel number 472 Alpha," I said, my voice deliberately flat, completely devoid of any trembling emotion or anger. "I also need to pull the complete probate file and all estate records for Harold Evans. Date of death was October 12th, exactly 2 years ago." June did not offer a polite, customer service smile. She simply nodded, pulled her worn keyboard closer, and began to type. The clacking of the plastic keys sounded like a metronome ticking down a hidden explosive device. I stood perfectly still, watching her eyes track back and forth across her dual monitors. For the first 30 seconds, it was just routine data entry. She navigated the archaic county database with the speed of a veteran. Then, her fingers completely stopped. She did not hit the backspace key to correct a typo. She did not squint as if trying to read a blurry, poorly scanned document. Her hands just froze in midair, hovering perfectly still over the home row of the keyboard. I knew that specific, terrible kind of hesitation. It was not the pause of a government clerk experiencing a slow internet connection or a software glitch. It was the sharp, breathless pause of an official realizing they were looking directly at a massive, glaring legal anomaly. June slowly shifted her gaze away from the bright monitor and looked at me straight through the smudged plexiglass window. "May I ask your full legal name and your specific relation to the deceased property owner?" "Aurora Evans," I answered immediately, refusing to break eye contact or show weakness. Harold Evans was my grandfather. The entire atmosphere around counter number 4 shifted instantly. June sat up straighter in her rolling chair. The bored, mechanical demeanor of a county desk clerk vanished entirely, replaced immediately by the guarded, hyper-aware posture of an investigator protecting a freshly discovered crime scene. She did not say a single word for a long moment. She carefully moved her computer mouse, clicked exactly twice, and sent a direct command to the massive industrial printer sitting directly behind her desk. The large machine whirred loudly to life, aggressively dragging heavy legal-sized cardstock through its internal rollers. 2 distinct pages shot out into the plastic output tray. June picked them up, grabbed a heavy rubber county stamp, and pressed it hard into the top right corner of each page. The loud, decisive thud of the ink stamp echoed sharply across the quiet. Empty lobby. She slid the papers through the small metal gap at the bottom of the glass divider. "These are the 2 most recent, legally recorded documents attached to that specific agricultural parcel," June said, her voice completely stripped of any casual, everyday warmth. "They were officially recorded into the permanent county ledger yesterday afternoon at exactly 2:15. I picked up the warm sheets of paper. My eyes bypassed the standard legal boilerplate, the margins, and the tax assessor notes. I immediately hunted for the core data. I scanned down to the middle of the first page and found the grantor section. The legal entity giving away the ownership of the property. It read, "Grantor, Estate of Harold Evans." I stared hard at the black ink. A cold, razor-sharp clarity washed over my brain, pushing away the exhaustion of my 14-hour shift. "June," I said, keeping my tone carefully level and precise. "How can the estate of Harold Evans legally grant a transfer of a property deed if there is absolutely no active probate case? You cannot legally transfer real estate from a dead man without a court-appointed executor, a judge signature, and a fully open, public file." June glanced nervously over her left shoulder toward the closed wooden door of the county supervisor office. She leaned closer to the glass barrier, dropping her voice to a soft volume that barely registered on the counter microphone speaker. "You are entirely correct. There is absolutely no active probate case anywhere in our system, but there is a secondary, restricted electronic packet physically attached to yesterday's deed transfer recording. It somehow bypassed the standard probate alert trigger." "What kind of packet?" I demanded, my grip tightening hard on the edges of the freshly printed deed. "I am legally prohibited from offering any legal advice or interpreting documents," June recited mechanically, quoting the strict county policy, though her dark eyes betrayed a deep, undeniable human concern. "I can only tell you what the system explicitly shows on the screen. I am not asking for a single piece of legal advice," I replied, my voice hard and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. "I am asking for my fundamental right to access public records. I want a certified, freshly printed copy of that attached digital packet. I want the exact recording codes, the digital timestamp, and the official Red County seal stamped on every single page." June hesitated. Her hand hovered uncertainly over the computer mouse. Printing that specific packet felt like crossing an invisible, highly dangerous line. She knew she was handing me the exact legal weapon needed to utterly destroy my family. She looked down at the stamped papers currently in my hand, then looked back up into my eyes. She understood exactly what was happening without me having to explain a single sordid detail of my parents standing by the farm gate demanding my signature. She had seen the greedy, desperate rush of relatives trying to quietly liquidate dirt and assets before the rightful heir could figure out the truth. Slowly, she moved her hand and clicked the left mouse button. The heavy printer behind her roared to life once again. It printed page after page, creating a thick, substantial stack of documents that felt heavy with devastating consequence. June gathered the freshly printed pages together, her hands moving with deliberate, careful precision. She did not just slide them casually through the gap in the glass. She placed them flat on the metal counter, resting her palm heavily against the top page, holding them back for one final second. She looked directly at me, her expression entirely serious, and delivered a sentence that made the blood in my veins turn to freezing ice. "There is something in here," June whispered, tapping the top page with her index finger. "It changes the owner." June moved her hand away from the stack of papers. She tapped the top page with her index finger. Her eyes locked on mine. I looked down through the scratched plexiglass. The heavy black letters centered at the top of the cover sheet read, "Deposited will for safekeeping." It was a physical shock, like touching a live electrical wire, but my body remained perfectly still. A deposited will meant my grandfather had brought his final wishes directly to the courthouse years ago. He had paid a processing fee to have the county clerk lock the original document inside a fireproof vault. It was a fail-safe. It was a permanent guard against fire, against accidental loss, and, most importantly, against greedy relatives who might conveniently lose a document they did not like. But there was a glaring, massive contradiction staring right back at me from the counter. A deposited will was supposed to automatically trigger a probate case the very moment a death certificate was filed with the county. Yet, this document had sat completely dormant in the local archives for exactly 2 years. It was a buried landmine that had never been officially armed by the court. June's voice dropped even lower, like the paperwork itself could hear her. She repeated it in an absolute whisper. She sounded genuinely afraid of the paperwork sitting between us. "I can only provide the public records exactly as they exist in the digital directory. I do not need legal advice," I replied. My voice sounded entirely hollow, echoing slightly in the empty lobby. I just need a fully certified copy of every single page inside that packet. June nodded slowly. But before she reached for the heavy red certification stamp, her fingers hovered over her keyboard again, her brow furrowed deeply, in the rigid world of county records. A buried document miraculously surfacing on the exact same afternoon a massive property transfer is recorded is never a coincidence. It is a blazing paper trail screaming to be audited. "Hold on," June muttered, her eyes narrowing at the right side of her secondary monitor. "Let me check the digital access logs for this specific file." She typed a quick command. A gray terminal window popped open on her screen, filling rapidly with dense rows of green text. The county computer system logged every single keystroke, every viewed page, and every print request. She scrolled down to the very bottom of the list, tracking the most recent activity. I watched her face lose its remaining color. She turned the large monitor slightly so I could see the screen clearly through the glass barrier. The log entries were brutally clear. Yesterday afternoon, exactly 45 minutes before the new property deed was officially stamped and recorded by the clerk, the system showed a file access request originating from Public Kiosk Terminal Number 3, located just down the hall in the main registry room. Anyone could view public records there, but to print an official document, the system required a swiped driver license or a credit card to process the $25 printing fee. The name attached to the credit card transaction glowed brightly on the screen. Darlene Evans. My chest tightened so painfully I briefly forgot how to breathe. The heavily air-conditioned air of the room suddenly felt abrasive against my skin. The timeline was no longer a wild theory. It was an undeniable, documented fact. My mother had walked into this very building yesterday. She had sat at kiosk number 3. She had searched for, found, and paid for a physical copy of my grandfather's deposited will. Less than 1 hour later, she and my father had executed a deed transferring the entire farm to a corporate developer. "I need my supervisor to handle this," June said, her voice incredibly tight. She did not wait for my response. She picked up her desk phone and dialed a short, 3-digit extension. "Mr. Fitch, this is June at Counter 4. I need you out here right now. We have a deposited will accessing anomaly attached to a high-value agricultural transfer." Less than 2 minutes later, a tall, severely balding man pushed through the heavy wooden door behind the counters. His brass nameplate read, "Supervisor Nolan Fitch." He wore a slightly rumpled beige suit and carried the heavy exhaustion of a man who dealt with bureaucratic disasters every single day. He walked straight to June's terminal. She did not speak. She just pointed at the screen and then pointed down at the printed stack of papers waiting on the metal counter. Nolan leaned in close, his eyes darting back and forth across the access logs and the deed transfer timestamps. He let out a long, slow breath through his teeth. He picked up the printed packet and examined the official county intake stamp printed on the first page of the will. "This intake stamp is completely authentic," Nolan said, his voice carrying the dry, authoritative weight of a judge. "Harold Evans personally deposited this document 8 years ago. The physical original is currently sitting securely in Vault Section Charlie. It is an entirely valid, legally binding document regarding its existence and filing status." He looked up at me, his eyes full of a grim, professional pity. "Miss Evans, this will should have been automatically elevated to the probate court 24 months ago. I cannot explain why it remained dormant, but I can officially confirm that the digital file was deliberately accessed and printed yesterday by the individual listed on this log." "Certify it," I said. My voice was entirely flat. The initial shock had completely burned away, leaving nothing but a freezing, calculating void in my chest. "Certify the will, certify the deed transfer, and certify the access log showing Darlene Evans." Nolan did not argue. He took the stack of papers from June. He walked over to a heavy, cast-iron stamping press bolted to a back table. He placed the documents carefully inside and pulled the heavy metal lever down. The loud, final crunch of the press embossing the paper echoed sharply through the room. He took a red ink pad and carefully stamped his official signature line on the back of every single page. He brought the stack back to the counter and slid it through the gap in the glass. The paper was heavy. It felt exactly like holding a loaded weapon. "You understand what this specific combination of documents means, do you not?" Nolan asked, keeping his voice strictly professional but heavily laden with warning. I looked down at the certified pages in my hands. The heavy embossed seals felt rough against my calloused fingertips. I understood exactly what it meant. When I drove to the courthouse today, a small, foolish part of my heart had still desperately hoped this was all a terrible misunderstanding. I had hoped my parents were simply ignorant, that they had blindly signed papers pushed by a predatory broker, unaware of my grandfather's true intentions. But these papers proved otherwise. The digital log was absolute proof of malice. My mother had not acted out of ignorance. She had pulled the will. She had read the words my grandfather wrote. She knew exactly what he wanted and exactly who he left the farm to. She had read it, and she had done it anyway. The betrayal was no longer a sudden, hot slap to the face. It was a cold, calculated knife driven slowly into my back by the woman who gave birth to me. I carefully folded the heavy packet and slid it into my thick work jacket pocket. The paper burned against my ribs. I did not say thank you to June or Nolan. I just turned away from the counter and walked steadily toward the heavy glass exit doors, carrying the exact tools I needed to tear their lies completely apart. I did not make it to the heavy glass exit doors. The physical weight of the folded packet in my jacket pocket felt like a burning ember against my ribs, demanding my immediate attention. I stopped dead in the middle of the tiled lobby, turned around, and walked right back to counter number 4. I pulled the papers out and spread the certified pages flat against the cold metal surface. I needed to see the exact words. I needed to dissect the anatomy of their lie, piece by piece, right here in the room where it was born. Reading the first page of the will was exactly like turning over heavy, wet soil with a shovel. It was real. It was tangible. The document was typed on old, thick bond paper, the kind that held black ink with absolute permanence. My eyes skipped past the standard legal preamble about being of sound mind and body. I hunted directly for the property description. The legal boundaries were mapped out in archaic, undeniable terms, from the rusted iron post on the northern ridge, following the tree line down to the dry creek bed, encompassing all 142 acres. It was the farm. It was my dirt. I moved to the second page. Article 3, Paragraph 2. I read the sentence 3 times to ensure my exhausted brain was not hallucinating the words. I leave the entirety of my real property, known as the Evans family tract, to my granddaughter, Aurora Evans. There were no confusing clauses. There were no percentages split amongst surviving children. There was no vague, sentimental language about preserving the land for future generations. It was a direct, surgical strike. Then, on the very next line, my grandfather twisted the knife deep into my parents' presumed authority. I hereby appoint Aurora Evans as the sole executor of this estate. I stood there staring at my own name printed in bold letters. I did not smile. I did not feel a sudden rush of victory, and I certainly did not feel any desire to celebrate. Instead, my mind flashed back to that brand new, aggressively red and white under-contract sign swinging wildly in the wind by the front gate. Just 1 hour ago, that piece of metal had looked like an immovable tombstone. Now, looking at the county seals on my grandfather's final testament, the sign suddenly stripped itself of all its terrifying power. It was no longer a legally binding threat. It was just a piece of cheap aluminum bolted to a dead wooden post. It was entirely meaningless. Supervisor Nolan Fitch had not retreated to his back office. He was still standing by the counter, watching me read. His face was a tight mask of grim, professional courtesy. He cleared his throat quietly. He held one more single sheet of paper in his right hand. "Miss Evans," Nolan said, his tone shifting from bureaucratic to strictly cautious. "When a high-value property is transferred by an estate that lacks a formal, open probate case, The county recorder requires a specific sworn statement to legally justify the transaction. I went ahead and pulled the exact attachment filed with yesterday's deed transfer. He slid the page across the scratched plexiglass gap. It was not a complex, multi-page corporate document. It was a single, straightforward affidavit. The bold heading at the top read, Affidavit of Death and Heirship. I read the core paragraph. It boldly claimed, under penalty of law, that Harold Evans had passed away intestate, the strict legal term for dying without a will. The document explicitly stated that because no will existed, his biological son, Russell Evans, was the sole rightful heir by default, granting him the absolute authority to liquidate the real estate. I looked at the bottom of the page. There, in stark blue ink, were the signatures, Russell Evans, Darlene Evans. Right next to their names was the circular, raised seal of a registered state notary public. They had raised their right hands, looked a legally commissioned officer of the state directly in the eye, and swore on the public record that the will I was currently holding in my left hand did not exist. June Ralston leaned forward from her chair. She had been quietly tapping at her keyboard while I read the affidavit. She reached over to her small receipt printer and ripped off a narrow slip of thermal paper. The digital access log showed exactly who looked at the file, June said, her voice dropping an octave, carrying the heavy weight of the final, damning piece of evidence. But this is the actual financial ledger for the transaction at the public kiosk. It shows exactly what was purchased. She placed the small receipt right next to the sworn affidavit. The printed text was crisp and undeniable. One printed copy of deposited will, paid in full via credit card, cardholder name, Darlene Evans, total fee, $25. I looked at the timestamps. The time of the credit card transaction on the receipt was exactly 2 hours and 15 minutes before the time printed on the notary stamp of the affidavit. I looked at the 3 documents laid out side by side on the metal counter. They looked exactly like freshly sharpened knives arranged meticulously on a surgeon table. To the left, the certified will proving my ownership. In the middle, the printed financial receipt proving my mother bought a physical copy of that exact will. To the right, the notarized affidavit where she and my father legally swore the will did not exist. The puzzle was completely solved. My parents had not made a careless administrative mistake. They had not been tricked or misled by a slick corporate real estate broker. My mother had physically held the truth in her hands. She had paid $25 for it. She had read my name as the sole beneficiary. And then, less than 3 hours later, she had walked into a notary office and signed a legally binding lie to steal my land and sell it to a developer. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the sterile, air-conditioned courthouse air fill my lungs. The hot, confusing anger that had choked me out at the farm was completely gone. In its place was a freezing, absolute focus. I carefully gathered the papers, stacking them in chronological order of their deception. I was no longer dealing with toxic relatives. I was no longer dealing with simple family drama. I was holding a fully documented, notarized false statement. I stepped away from counter number 4 and walked out of the registry lobby into the massive, echoing marble corridor of the county building. I found a quiet corner near a row of heavy oak benches, away from the prying ears of other desperate families. I pulled out my phone and dialed the direct cellular number for Carmen Vale. Carmen was a probate and real estate attorney who operated out of a sleek, minimalist office downtown. She did not act like a traditional, hand-holding family lawyer. She operated with the cold, mechanical precision of a surgical scalpel. She charged $400 an hour, and she was worth every single penny because she viewed human emotion as a severe, unnecessary liability in a legal dispute. She spoke in absolute facts, and she demanded the exact same from her clients. She answered on the very first ring. "Vale," she said. Her voice was sharp, clipped, and completely awake. "Carmen, this is Aurora Evans," I said, keeping my own voice just as level and detached as hers. "I have a critical situation at the family farm. I need immediate tactical direction." "Give me the exact variables," Carmen commanded. "No pleasantries. No asking how my day was going. just a strict demand for the raw data. I fed her the information in a rapid chronological sequence. A deed transfer was recorded yesterday afternoon. The grantor is listed as the estate of Harold Evans, transferring the entire 142-acre agricultural parcel to a commercial development group. There is absolutely no active probate case open in the county system. However, I am currently standing in the courthouse holding a fully certified copy of a deposited will. It names me as the sole beneficiary of the real estate and the sole executor of the estate. I paused for exactly 1 second to let that sink in before delivering the lethal blow. I also have a certified public kiosk access log and a printed financial receipt. They explicitly prove my mother paid $25 to print a physical copy of this exact deposited will. Exactly 2 hours and 15 minutes after that transaction, she and my father signed a notarized affidavit of heirship, swearing under penalty of perjury that my grandfather died completely intestate. The phone line went completely silent. Carmen did not gasp. She did not express moral outrage. I could practically hear the invisible gears turning in her mind, instantly calculating the precise legal trajectory of the situation. They committed documented perjury to bypass the probate court, Carmen stated flatly. Her tone was not shocked. It was entirely predatory. They tried to run a fast title transfer before you could establish a legal foothold. We are not going to call them. We are not going to argue with them. We are going to completely paralyze their transaction. You are already inside the county building. Do not leave those premises under any circumstances. What is the first step? I asked. We turn the bureaucracy in our favor, Carmen said. You need to open an emergency estate case right now. Submit that certified will to the probate clerk. Then, you are going to file a lis pendens, a notice of pending action. We are going to aggressively cloud the title of that property. Once that notice is officially stamped into the public registry, their corporate buyer will be entirely unable to secure title insurance. Without a clean title insurance policy, the commercial funding stops dead in its tracks. The entire multi-million-dollar deal will instantly freeze. I hung up the phone and walked briskly down the long marble corridor toward the probate division. I didn't go back to argue. I stayed in the building, because paperwork moves faster than anger. I stepped up to the probate window and paid the $250 filing fee directly out of my own checking account. I took a heavy black pen and filled out the petition for probate. I attached the certified copy of my grandfather's will. In the section for special requests, I formally asked for an emergency injunction hearing, citing the immediate, physical threat of a commercial survey crew altering the land the very next morning. Every single blank box I filled out felt like laying a heavy stone brick in an unbreakable fortress wall around my property. The probate clerk reviewed my forms, stamped the top page, and handed me a bright yellow receipt. Printed boldly across the top was a brand new 9-digit case number. That exact sequence of numbers was the official, undeniable government recognition of my grandfather's final wishes. I took that receipt, turned around, and walked straight back to the main registry room. I marched right back to June Ralston at Counter 4. Carmen had quickly drafted the formal notice of probate filing and the notice of pending action, emailing the secure document files directly to my phone. I had printed them out at the same public kiosk my mother had used yesterday. I slid the fresh stack of papers, along with the probate receipt, through the gap in the plexiglass. Record these notices directly against parcel number 472 Alpha, I instructed June. She did not ask a single question. She took the pages. The heavy cast iron stamping press crashed down onto the desk once again, echoing heavily through the room. She typed the new variables into the master registry system. She printed a series of heavy barcode labels and slapped them onto the margins of the notices. Every single number, every single letter of those recording codes acted like a heavy steel padlock snapping permanently shut on the main gate of the farm. The public record now screamed a massive warning to the world that the land was heavily disputed. I gathered my officially stamped copies and stepped back out into the quiet hallway. I opened my phone and pulled up the high-resolution photograph I had taken of the real estate broker standing in my driveway. I zoomed in on the corporate logo printed on the folder he had been holding. I did a quick internet search, found the main corporate directory for the primary development group, and dialed the direct office line for their legal department. A man answered, identifying himself in a smooth, arrogant voice as the senior managing counsel for land acquisitions. "This is Aurora Evans," I said, my voice projecting total, unwavering authority. "I am the legally appointed executor for the estate of Harold Evans. I am calling to formally notify your department that the deed transfer your broker recorded yesterday afternoon for the Evans family tract is entirely fraudulent. There is now an active probate case and a formal notice of pending action officially recorded against the parcel. You do not have a clean title anymore." The sound of typing and shuffling papers on the exact other end of the line stopped instantly. The silence was heavy and deeply suffocating. The senior counsel was no longer a smooth corporate operator. He was a lawyer mentally calculating the massive, catastrophic financial liability of buying a stolen farm. "Miss Evans," he finally replied. His voice was completely stripped of its previous arrogance. It was now tight with panicked, careful caution. "If what you are currently stating is legally accurate, your parents lied to our entire acquisition team as well." I stood perfectly still in the cold marble hallway, feeling no pity whatsoever for a billion-dollar corporation that had failed to do basic, fundamental due diligence. "Send that exact confirmation to my attorney in writing," I said. And I ended the call. I drove back down the county highway as the late afternoon sun began to dip heavily behind the western ridge. The shadows stretched long and dark across the cracked asphalt. Returning to the farm did not feel like coming home. It felt exactly like stepping back across the yellow tape of an active crime scene. The familiar dip in the gravel road, the massive old oak tree by the turnoff, the rusted metal mailbox leaning slightly to the left. Everything was completely tainted now. I slowed my heavy truck to a crawl as the main iron gate finally came into view. In the 3 short hours I had been gone, the stage had been completely reset. The number of neon pink survey stakes had easily tripled. They now formed a solid, aggressive perimeter completely surrounding the front pasture, piercing the dry earth like bright, artificial weeds, and right below the swinging under-contract sign, a brand-new addition had been bolted tightly directly into the wooden crossbeam. It was a stark black-and-white aluminum rectangle. "No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted." I parked my truck exactly where I had left it earlier, cut the engine, and stepped out into the rapidly cooling air. The wind had died down, leaving a heavy, suffocating stillness over the yard. My parents were waiting. They stood side by side near the bottom of the porch steps. They did not look angry anymore. They looked settled, confident, and entirely rehearsed. They had clearly spent the entire afternoon practicing their specific roles for my return. As I walked slowly toward the gate, my father crossed his thick arms over his chest. He delivered his line with the stiff, unnatural cadence of a poorly trained actor reading off a script. "Are you ready to sign the consent form now?" he asked. I did not raise my voice. I did not ask them how they could look a state notary in the eye and lie. I simply reached into my heavy jacket pocket and pulled out the crisp, white document June Ralston had just processed. I unfolded it slowly. I held it up in the fading daylight, making absolutely sure the heavy red county seal and the long printed recording barcode at the top margin were clearly visible to them. "The title to this entire parcel is now formally in dispute," I stated, my voice carrying the dead, flat weight of absolute certainty. "There is a notice of pending action officially recorded with the county clerk as of 1 hour ago. There is also an active, emergency probate case opened under my name. The transaction is completely frozen." I watched my mother carefully. A normal person, caught in a massive, legally documented lie, would exhibit immediate panic. They would pale, or stutter, or collapse under the sudden, crushing weight of the consequences. Darlene Evans did none of those things. She did not crumble. Her jaw tightened just a fraction of an inch. Her eyes hardened into dark, impenetrable stones. She absorbed the blow and instantly pivoted to a brand new tactical angle. "The commercial survey crew is arriving tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, she said, her tone dangerously smooth and even. "And there will be official law enforcement personnel present to ensure they are not harassed by unauthorized individuals." I did not take the bait. I did not argue about who was legally authorized to stand on this dirt. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera application. I switched it to video mode and hit the red record button. I held the device up, keeping my arms perfectly steady. I did not point the lens at their faces. They were entirely irrelevant to the physical evidence. I panned the camera slowly from left to right, documenting the exact placement of the new aluminum warning sign. I walked a few measured paces down the fence line, capturing the fresh wooden stakes driven deep into the soil. I narrated the video in a calm, detached voice, stating the current date, the exact time of late afternoon, and the physical alterations made to the property boundaries. I treated the recording process exactly like a meteorologist logging the weather. It was just a mechanical, emotionless collection of environmental facts. As I lowered the phone and saved the video file, the device vibrated sharply in my palm. The screen displayed an unknown local number. I swiped the glass to answer and held it to my ear. "Hello," I said quietly. "Is this Aurora Evans?" A stern female voice asked through the speaker. "Speaking," I replied. "This is dispatch for the county sheriff's office. We are calling to formally notify you that a trespassing complaint has been officially filed against you at the property located on County Road 9. You are strictly advised to vacate the premises immediately to avoid a physical dispatch of deputies." The sheer audacity of the maneuver almost took my breath away. But Carmen Vale had trained my mind well in the last few hours. "I need the exact name of the dispatcher I am speaking with, the official computer-aided dispatch incident number, and the full name of the reporting party," I demanded, matching her stern tone with cold, administrative precision. The dispatcher paused, clearly surprised by the total lack of panic or argument. "This is Operator 4-2. Incident number is 8874 Alpha. The reporting party is Darlene Evans." I looked directly through the iron bars of the gate at my mother. She was watching me intently, waiting for the fear to set in, waiting for me to run. I kept my eyes locked securely on hers as I spoke back into the phone. "Operator 4-2, I am the legally appointed executor of the estate that owns this specific property. Please update the current incident notes immediately. Record that there is an active probate case filed today, and a formal notice of pending action is securely recorded on the property deed. This is a civil title dispute, not a criminal trespass. If deputies are dispatched, they will be stepping directly into an active estate litigation." "Understood, ma'am," the dispatcher replied, her tone shifting instantly to neutral. Bureaucratic caution. "The system notes are updated. Have a good evening." I ended the call and slid the phone back into my pocket. I stood alone in the gathering dusk, the dry wind whipping the tall grass around my heavy boots. My mother had just crossed a terrifying new threshold. She was no longer just forging documents or lying to corporate buyers. She was actively attempting to weaponize the police dispatch system, using badges and guns as cheap theatrical props to intimidate the rightful owner off the land. The heavy crunch of thick rubber tires on gravel broke the evening silence exactly 20 minutes after I hung up the phone. A white county sheriff cruiser pulled slowly up the long driveway, its red and blue light bar painting the sides of the old wooden barn in harsh, sweeping colors. The vehicle came to a complete stop just behind my parked truck. The driver's side door opened, and a tall, broad-shouldered deputy stepped out into the cool air. His silver name tag caught the flashing lights, reading Halden. In the center of his dark uniform chest, a small square body camera was mounted securely, its indicator light glowing a steady, unblinking red. My father did not waste a single second. He practically sprinted down the porch steps, throwing his arms wide open in a grand, theatrical gesture of absolute victimhood. "Officer, thank God you are here," Russell practically shouted, his voice thick with manufactured outrage. He pointed a thick, calloused finger directly at me. My daughter is completely out of control. She is aggressively harassing us. She is refusing to leave the premises. And she is deliberately obstructing a massive, legally binding real estate transaction. We explicitly asked her to vacate the property, and she is trespassing. Deputy Halden did not react to the shouting. He possessed the tired, neutral posture of a man who spent 40 hours a week untangling messy domestic disputes. He raised one hand, a silent command for my father to stop talking, and rested his other hand loosely on his heavy-duty belt. "Okay, sir. Take a deep breath and step back," Deputy Halden said, his voice entirely flat and strictly professional. He turned his attention to me, his eyes quickly scanning my work clothes and the heavy boots planted firmly in the dirt. "Ma'am, I am going to need to see your government-issued identification, and I need you to explain exactly why you are refusing to leave this property after being asked by the owners." I kept my voice level. No excuses. No childhood stories, just facts, and the stamped documents in his hands. I simply reached into my jacket, pulled out my driver license, and handed it over. Then, I handed him the thick, freshly stamped stack of papers from the county clerk. "I am not trespassing, Deputy Halden," I stated, keeping my tone as cold and mechanical as the humming engine of his cruiser. "I am the legally appointed executor of the estate that rightfully owns this entire 142-acre parcel. Those individuals do not possess a clean title to this land. You are currently holding a formally recorded notice of pending action, along with the official receipt for an emergency probate case opened exactly 3 hours ago. The recording barcode is printed on the top right corner of the first page." The deputy clicked on a small tactical flashlight clipped to his shoulder. Illuminating the documents, he read the heavy red county seals. He saw the 9-digit case number. I watched the practiced neutrality on his face shift into a sharp, focused legal assessment. He understood instantly that he was no longer dealing with a simple family argument over a house key. He was standing directly in the middle of a high-stakes, heavily documented civil war. Halden lowered the papers and looked directly at my father. "Sir?" the deputy asked, his voice noticeably harder now. "Do you have a certified, stamped copy of your recorded deed proving absolute ownership of this specific parcel?" The aggressive, righteous anger instantly drained from my father's face. He blinked rapidly, completely unprepared for the question. The script he had practiced with my mother did not include a demand for physical proof. "It is currently processing," Russell stammered, taking a small, nervous step backward. "The real estate broker is handling all the final paperwork with the corporate buyers. It is a done deal." "Processing is not an ownership document," Deputy Halden replied smoothly. He reached up and keyed the radio microphone attached to his left shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I need a rapid title status check on a residential agricultural parcel located on County Road 9. Stand by for the exact parcel identification number." The deputy read the long string of numbers directly from my recorded notice. The yard descended into an absolute, agonizing silence. The only sounds were the quiet hum of the cruiser engine and the dry wind rustling through the tall grass. My mother stood completely frozen on the porch, her jaw clamped so tight I could see the muscles twitching under her pale skin. She knew exactly what the radio was going to say. 2 long, agonizing minutes passed before the radio cracked with static. "Unit 4, dispatch. County Registry confirms the property in question currently has a highly restricted title. There is an active notice of pending action, an emergency probate filing, and a recorded dispute attached to the deed as of 1400 hours today." "Copy that. Dispatch," Halden said. He released the microphone and handed my documents back to me. He turned his body squarely toward my parents. The authority in his posture was absolute. "This is a legally documented civil dispute over property ownership," Deputy Halden announced, his voice carrying clearly across the yard to ensure the body camera recorded every single syllable. "Because there is an active probate case and a formal dispute on the county record. I possess absolutely no legal authority to remove this woman from the premises for trespassing tonight. She has established a documented legal right to be here until a sitting judge explicitly rules otherwise. My father opened his mouth to argue, but the deputy cut him off instantly with a sharp raise of his hand. Furthermore, Halden continued, locking his eyes directly onto my mother, who had placed the original emergency call, utilizing county emergency dispatch services to fraudulently report a trespass in an attempt to forcefully resolve a known civil property dispute is a severe misuse of law enforcement resources. If we are called out here again under false pretenses to intimidate a party with active legal standing, this department will formally review the incident for potential criminal charges regarding false reporting. The warning was delivered politely, but it landed like a heavy physical blow. My mother actually flinched. "Deputy Halden," I spoke up, breaking the heavy silence. "Before you clear this scene, I have one official request. I need you to document the physical state of this property for your incident report." I pointed toward the front gate. "Please use your camera to photograph that unauthorized no trespassing sign that was illegally attached to the fence this afternoon. I also need you to photograph the neon pink commercial survey stakes driven into the eastern property line. They were placed here by an unauthorized third party in direct violation of the active probate case. I want my recorded county notices photographed directly alongside those items to prove they were present at the exact same time." The deputy gave a short, professional nod. "I will include the photographs in the master case file. The incident report will be available at the downtown precinct in exactly 48 hours. He walked over to the gate, pulling a digital camera from his tactical vest, and began taking bright, flashing pictures of the cheap aluminum sign and the wooden stakes. Every single flash of the camera was a blinding, undeniable validation of the truth. I stood perfectly still and watched my parents. Their practiced confidence had completely evaporated. The slick, corporate intimidation tactics had failed. The weaponized police call had backfired disastrously. For the very first time in their lives, they had absolutely no ground left to stand on with their empty, manipulative words. They were stripped of their power, exposed directly to the harsh light of the law, leaving behind nothing but a deep, bitter, and entirely silent resentment. The taillights of Deputy Halden's cruiser disappeared down the dark country road. I sat alone in the cab of my heavy work truck, the engine idling low, vibrating steadily through the floorboards. I was exhausted, but the adrenaline from the confrontation still burned sharply in my veins. My phone vibrated aggressively against the center console. The bright screen illuminated the dark, cramped cabin, displaying Carmen Vale's name. I grabbed the device and swiped the green icon to answer. "I need you physically present in my office first thing tomorrow morning," Carmen said. She did not offer a greeting. Her voice was moving at a completely different, highly accelerated velocity now. "June Ralston from the county clerk registry just called my direct line. They made a massive, critical discovery during their mandatory internal audit of your grandfather's safekeeping file." "What kind of discovery?" I asked, gripping the steering wheel tight. "A physical scanning error," Carmen explained rapidly, her words clipping together with precise efficiency. "When the county digitized the original deposited documents 2 years ago, the heavy paper feed jammed, 2 pages stuck completely together. June went back into the physical fireproof vault tonight to pull the original paper file for the emergency probate judge. She found a supplementary page stuck to the back cover. It was never uploaded to the public digital terminal." A heavy, suffocating silence filled the truck cabin. "Is it a brand new will?" "No, it is a handwritten codicil," Carmen stated. "It is fully signed, properly dated, and legally witnessed by 2 independent, sworn parties. It is absolutely bulletproof in the eyes of the court. Your grandfather wrote it exactly 6 months after he deposited the original will. And Aurora, he knew exactly who he was dealing with." Carmen read the exact text over the phone, translating the archaic legal cursive into sharp, modern facts. It was not a long, complicated paragraph filled with confusing jargon. It was a precise, surgical strike. My grandfather had explicitly predicted that my mother and father would attempt to bypass my rightful inheritance. He had accurately anticipated they would try to sell, mortgage, or otherwise quietly liquidate the agricultural parcel behind my back the moment he was gone. The codicil contained a strict, absolute penalty clause. It stated clearly that if Russell or Darlene Evans attempted to contest the primary will, or if they engaged in any unauthorized transfer of the real estate, they would be immediately and permanently disinherited from any and all residual estate assets. That included the lucrative life insurance policies and the substantial personal bank accounts that were originally left to them in the main document. A wave of absolute, terrifying clarity washed over me. The puzzle pieces shifted into place. My parents had rushed the sale because my mother had seen the deposited will at the county desk yesterday afternoon. She knew that if probate opened, the farm would transfer to me, fast and clean. Their only option was to bury the truth, file the false affidavit, and outrun the system before it woke up. Their only viable option was to completely bury the truth. They had to bypass the probate court entirely, sell the land immediately to an ignorant corporate third party, and pocket the millions before the slow county system ever woke up. They foolishly thought the missing digital scan was their perfect, unbreakable cover. They knew about the codicil, I said softly, the heavy realization turning the blood in my veins to freezing ice. They sold it because they thought it was a secret. Of course they knew, Carmen confirmed, her voice completely devoid of any surprise or sympathy. Your mother paid the $25 fee for the complete physical copy. The clerk handed her the full printed packet she paid for. That is exactly why they panicked and rushed to file the false affidavit of heirship less than 3 hours later. It was a desperate, incredibly reckless gamble to outrun a dead man's final trap. What is our exact next move? I asked, my voice hardening. We escalate to maximum legal pressure, Carmen stated, her tone turning predatory. I am currently drafting an emergency application for a temporary restraining order to completely halt all physical and legal activity on the land. I am combining every single piece of acquired evidence into one devastating file. The original will, the newly discovered codicil, the digital access logs, the financial printing receipt, and the notarized false affidavit. We are handing the presiding judge a completely weaponized narrative of intentional fraud. I should also inform you that the corporate buyer legal department contacted me, Carmen added smoothly. They sent a formal communication exactly 10 minutes ago stating they are voluntarily pausing the survey crews and halting the massive funding transfer pending an internal review of the title dispute. So we won? I asked, a brief, foolish sliver of relief entering my voice. Absolutely not, Carmen snapped back, shutting down the optimism instantly. You never rely on the corporate goodwill of a billion-dollar development group. They are only pausing to temporarily protect their own financial liability. The very second they think they can find a tiny legal loophole to validate their fraudulent purchase, they will bring those heavy bulldozers straight through your front gate. We do not rely on a polite email. We rely entirely on a signed court order from a judge. Carmen shifted her tone, issuing strict, unyielding instructions. I need you to open your mobile email application right now. I just sent you a blank sworn declaration. You are going to sign it electronically. You are going to attach the high-resolution photographs you took today of the commercial survey stakes and the new warning signs. We have to prove to the court that there is an immediate, physical threat of irreparable harm to the property boundaries if the injunction is not granted tonight. I put the phone on speaker mode, opened my email, and quickly downloaded the secure legal document. I read through the rigid, formal language, typing my electronic signature on the bottom line with cold precision. I attached the exact video files and the clear, undeniable pictures of the illegal markers. I hit send, watching the loading bar confirm the delivery to Carmen's secure server downtown. Received, Carmen confirmed a few seconds later. I am submitting the emergency packet to the duty judge immediately. We will have our answer before the sun comes up tomorrow. I leaned my head back against the cold glass of the truck window. The sheer magnitude of the deception was almost too heavy to carry. My own flesh and blood had looked at a legal warning from a dead man, decided his final words meant absolutely nothing, and actively conspired to erase my entire future for cash. "Carmen," I said, my voice dropping barely above a whisper in the quiet cab, "what happens to them now?" There was a brief, heavy pause on the phone line. When Carmen finally spoke, she did not sound like a civilian lawyer giving standard legal advice. She sounded exactly like a ruthless executioner calmly confirming a final sentence. "Aurora," Carmen said, her carefully measured words slicing perfectly through the silence, making a cold chill run violently down my spine. "You need to drastically change your perspective right now. This is no longer just about getting the land back. We have already secured the land. This is about proving they knew the absolute truth. And they still raised their right hands and swore the exact opposite to a commissioned officer of the state." The glow of my laptop screen was the only light in my dark kitchen at 5:45 the next morning. The emergency hearing was entirely virtual, conducted over a secure, encrypted video conference link. The Honorable Judge Marcus Thorne appeared in the center square of my monitor. Sitting behind a heavy mahogany bench in a dark robe, he had the rigid, impatient posture of a magistrate who possessed absolutely zero tolerance for emotional family theatrics. He did not look at the camera. He stared intently at the digital file Carmen had uploaded the previous night. "Counselor Vale," Judge Thorne began, his voice dry and echoing slightly through my small computer speakers. "I have reviewed your emergency petition. You are alleging a massive, coordinated fraud regarding a high-value agricultural parcel. You have exactly 5 minutes to walk me through the exhibits." Carmen did not waste a single second on an opening statement. She deployed our evidence like a series of perfectly timed artillery strikes, each one designed to systematically demolish my parents and their legal standing. "Your Honor, Exhibit A is a deed transfer recorded yesterday afternoon, conveying 142 acres to a commercial developer," Carmen stated, her tone entirely clinical. "The grantor is listed as the estate of Harold Evans. Exhibit B is a sworn affidavit, signed by Russell and Darlene Evans, notarized on that exact same afternoon, explicitly claiming the deceased died intestate." She paused for half a beat, letting the foundation of their lie settle onto the virtual record. "Exhibit C shatters that affidavit completely," Carmen continued, accelerating her delivery. "It is a certified copy of a deposited will, held in county safekeeping for 2 years, naming my client as the sole executor and beneficiary. Exhibit D is the digital access log from the county registry. Exhibit E is the financial receipt proving Darlene Evans physically printed a copy of that exact will. Both transactions occurred mere hours before she swore under oath that no such document existed." Carmen delivered the final, lethal blow. "And Exhibit F is the newly recovered handwritten codicil, which explicitly strips all inheritance from Russell and Darlene Evans should they attempt to bypass the primary will or illegally liquidate the real estate." Judge Thorne stopped scrolling his mouse. He leaned closer to his monitor. He was not looking at the complex legal arguments or the property descriptions. His eyes were locked entirely on Exhibit E, the $25 printing receipt. He did not stare at it out of idle curiosity. He stared at it because he was looking at the exact, undeniable motive for felony perjury printed plainly in black and white ink. "The timeline here is completely indefensible," Judge Thorne muttered softly, almost to himself. Before raising his voice back to its authoritative volume, he shifted his gaze to the video square containing my face. "Miss Evans, swear in." A court clerk quickly administered the oath over the audio feed. "Miss Evans," the judge said, his tone demanding absolute brevity, "your petition requests an immediate physical halt to all activities on the land. What is the current, active threat to the property that requires judicial intervention before the rising of the sun today?" I did not talk about my feelings or my grandfather. I gave him the exact, cold, hard facts he required. "Your Honor, unauthorized commercial survey crews have already altered the physical state of the property. They have driven neon markers into the eastern boundary line and affixed an illegal warning sign to the main gate. The buyers intend to bring heavy equipment onto the agricultural parcel this morning to begin the grading process, if they break ground. The physical integrity of the land will be permanently destroyed. Judge Thorne nodded once. It was a sharp, decisive movement. The evidence provided easily meets the threshold for an emergency intervention. The blatant contradiction between the sworn affidavit and the county access logs is severe. He looked directly into his camera. I am granting an immediate temporary restraining order. This order explicitly forbids any and all individuals, including the corporate buyers, from entering the parcel. It forbids all surveying, digging, or any alteration to the current physical status quo. Furthermore, I am legally stripping Russell and Darlene Evans of any presumed authority to represent this estate in any capacity whatsoever. Then, the judge did exactly what Carmen had predicted. He turned the administrative procedure into a deadly weapon. "Clerk," Judge Thorne barked. "Extract the notarized affidavit of heirship, the county access logs, and the financial printing receipt from this civil file. Forward those 3 specific exhibits directly to the district attorney office for immediate review. There is clear, documented probable cause here for sworn perjury and real estate fraud." The hearing concluded in less than 15 minutes. There was no dramatic gavel strike, just the quiet click of the video feed disconnecting. Carmen moved with terrifying speed. Within 2 hours, professional process servers had physically delivered the stamped court orders. One server walked straight into the sleek, glass-walled lobby of the commercial development group downtown. Another server drove out to the county road, handing the heavy legal packet directly to my furious, silent parents as they stood on the front porch of the farmhouse. While the servers were distributing the paper trap, Carmen electronically filed the new judge mandate with the county clerk. June Ralston processed it immediately, the public registry updated with a brand new, glaring notice securely tied to the parcel deed. The property file no longer just showed a pending dispute, it now practically screamed to the entire world that the land was heavily protected by a judicial lock, and anyone who touched it would face the absolute wrath of a sitting judge. The legal architecture was finally complete. The fortress was built. I did not go to the farm that afternoon. I let the silence and the heavy weight of the freshly served court order crush my parents for an entire day. They were trapped. They could not sell the land. They could not touch the money. And the district attorney was about to start reviewing their forged signatures. I waited until the next morning. I woke up long before dawn, dressed in my heavy work clothes, and drove out to the country road. The air was freezing, and the sky was just beginning to turn a pale, bruised purple. I did not drive out there to argue with my mother or listen to my father scream. I parked my truck right across the 2-lane asphalt. Directly facing my main iron gate, I turned off the engine, rolled down the window, and let the cold wind bite my face. I sat there in the quiet dawn, watching the empty driveway, waiting to see exactly who would be stupid enough to show up and dare to disrespect a direct order from the court. The heavy diesel engines of 3 commercial work trucks broke the freezing morning silence right at 9:30. They rumbled down the county road and pulled up directly in front of the main iron gate of the farm. My parents were sitting in the passenger seats of the lead vehicle. They had intentionally brought the survey crew out here, desperately trying to create a forced physical reality, hoping that if they just got the heavy equipment onto the dirt, the legal system would be too slow to stop them. They thought the workers were their backup. They had no idea they were leading them straight into a legally binding trap. I stepped out of my truck and stood firmly in the center of the driveway. My father threw open the passenger door of the lead work truck, his face completely flushed with arrogant confidence. He opened his mouth to shout an order at me, but the sound of his voice was instantly drowned out by the sharp, wailing burst of a police siren. Deputy Mark Halden pulled his county cruiser onto the gravel shoulder, his light bar flashing brilliant red and blue across the frost-covered grass. He stepped out of his vehicle, but this time, he was not here to merely keep the peace. He held a thick stack of papers in his right hand. The official seal of the presiding judge was stamped clearly on the top page. His body camera was already activated, the small red light blinking steadily. "Shut off the engines," Deputy Halden commanded, his voice projecting with absolute, undeniable authority. The foreman of the survey crew, a heavy-set man in a high-visibility jacket, immediately killed the engine. He stepped down from the cab, looking confused and cautious. Deputy Halden walked straight up to the foreman and held up the papers. "I am holding a fully executed temporary restraining order signed by Judge Marcus Thorne at 6 o'clock this morning. This order strictly prohibits any physical alteration, surveying, or entry onto this specific agricultural parcel by any commercial entity or private individual representing the buyers. If your crew takes one single step past that iron gate, I will arrest every single one of you for violating a direct judicial mandate." The foreman did not argue. He did not look at my parents for permission. A smart contractor never gambles his business license against a signed court order. "Pack it up, boys," the foreman yelled to his crew. "We are entirely done here. Turn the rigs around." "No," Russell screamed, his voice cracking with sudden, absolute panic. "You are under contract. We are paying you to do a job." My father completely lost his mind. The carefully constructed facade of a legitimate businessman shattered into a million pieces. He lunged toward the back of the retreating work truck, grabbed a heavy wooden mallet and an armful of neon-pink survey stakes. He sprinted toward the eastern property line, his boots tearing through the frozen grass. He was completely delusional, acting as if driving a piece of wood into the dirt with sheer physical force could somehow overturn the ink of a county judge. "Russell Evans, drop the tools immediately," Deputy Halden ordered, his hand resting securely on his duty belt as he walked purposefully toward my father. My father ignored the warning. He raised the heavy mallet high above his head and swung it down violently, trying to drive a stake into the hardened earth. Halden did not yell. He did not draw a weapon. He simply executed the cold, mechanical procedure of the law. He closed the distance, grabbed my father by the back of his heavy winter coat, and pulled him away from the fence line. When Russell thrashed and tried to pull his arm away, the deputy swiftly spun him around, forced his hands behind his back, and secured them with heavy metal handcuffs. The sharp, ratcheting click of the steel cuffs echoed loudly across the quiet morning yard. "Russell Evans," Halden stated, his breathing perfectly even, "you are being formally detained for severe obstruction of justice and direct violation of a temporary restraining order. You are going to sit in the back of my cruiser until you cool down, and then you are going to be processed at the county jail." My mother stood frozen by the gate, her face completely drained of blood. She watched her husband being marched toward the police car, completely powerless to stop the bureaucratic machine she had arrogantly tried to manipulate just 24 hours earlier. My phone vibrated in my heavy jacket pocket. It was Carmen Vale. I answered the call, my eyes still locked on my mother. "Aurora," Carmen said, her voice carrying a rare trace of genuine awe. "I just received a call from the probate clerk. When they were reviewing the handwritten codicil for the final docket, they found another paragraph. It was crammed tightly into the very bottom margin of the back page, written in incredibly small script. "What does it say?" I asked, watching the survey trucks completely disappear down the highway. "Your grandfather did not just leave you the land," Carmen explained, delivering the final, brilliant twist. "He built a permanent defense mechanism. The codicil explicitly states that if any unauthorized party attempts to fraudulently transfer the title, you, as the sole executor, are immediately granted the absolute legal authority to place the entire 142 acres into an irrevocable family conservation trust." I stopped breathing for a second. "A conservation trust?" "Yes," Carmen confirmed. "It means you can legally lock the land. It can never be commercially developed. It can never be subdivided. It can never be sold to a corporate entity. The strict environmental and historical conditions attached to the trust make it virtually impossible to liquidate. Your grandfather knew exactly how greedy they were, so he gave you the exact legal key to make the farm entirely worthless to anyone who only wanted cash. The trap was completely sprung, and there was absolutely no way out for them. Within 48 hours, the massive corporate development group formally withdrew their purchase offer, but they did not just walk away quietly. They immediately turned their aggressive legal department entirely against my parents. They filed a massive civil lawsuit demanding full restitution of their earnest money, plus thousands of dollars in legal fees and punitive damages, explicitly stating they had been sold a fraudulent lie. My parents were completely ruined. They faced a crushing financial burden from the corporate lawsuit, and even worse, the county district attorney officially opened a criminal investigation into the notarized false affidavit. They were staring down the barrel of felony perjury charges, facing the terrifying reality of standing before a criminal judge to explain why they swore a dead man had no will. I stood alone in the center of the vast front pasture. The winter sun finally broke through the heavy gray clouds, casting a warm, golden light across the frozen soil. The violent clanging. Under contract sign was gone. Tossed into the back of a junk pile, the neon pink stakes had been pulled out of the earth and burned. The wind swept down from the northern ridge, rustling the tall, dry grass around my boots. Just a few days ago, that sound had felt like a harsh, mocking warning, but today, it was entirely different. The wind did not carry the threat of betrayal anymore. It carried a deep, settling confirmation. The dirt beneath my feet was secure. The public records at the county courthouse proudly bore my name, locked securely in heavy red ink and permanent digital files. The farm was finally safe. Protected not by shouting or anger, but by the cold, unbreakable power of the truth. Thank you so much for listening to this story today. I would absolutely love to know where in the world you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and let me know your city or country, and share your thoughts on the story. If your family attempted to sell your legacy right behind your back, would you confront them face to face first? Or would you go straight to the county clerk to find the ink, the stamps, and the file numbers? Please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and show your support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by so many more people.